In the deep subterranean silence of the Grand Archive, I traced the schematics of Chamber 42 with a trembling primary digit. The physical dimensions were wrong. I had measured the perimeter 3 times to be certain. The chamber was exactly 1 centimeter smaller than the foundational carvings dictated. The obsidian walls were slowly, imperceptibly closing in, as if adjusting to the sheer, crushing weight of the new Terran data core resting on the central pedestal. If I could successfully index this alien history, the Elder Communion would finally grant me full integration as a prime archivist. I wanted that permanent position more than anything. I wish I could say the walls were only settling, but what I found inside those Terran records. You need to listen very carefully to what comes next. The interface hummed, casting a pale, aggressive illumination across my basalt chassis. I initiated the preliminary decryption of the Terran naval schematics. The structural projections materialized in the air before me. My cognitive matrix stalled. The vessel designs were absurd. A standard cruiser of their classification should have required a single, centralized atmospheric regulator. Instead, the holographic wireframe displayed a tangled, choked labyrinth of overlapping pipes, duplicated vents, and parasitic secondary nodes crammed into every available void. It made no logical sense. Why would any spacefaring species intentionally cripple their own vessels with so much useless, dead mass? I stared at the dense blue lines. A creeping harmonic dissonance began to vibrate through the silicate bonds of my torso. The mystery of that dead mass haunted my processing cycles as I waded deeper into the archive. In all my years of studying galactic architecture, across dozens of integrated species, efficiency was the universal constant. You build what is required. You optimize the weight, which meant the Terrans were either mathematically incompetent or they knew something the rest of the galaxy did not. I accessed their engineering annexes to find the answer. It wasn't incompetence. It was a principle they called redundancy scaling. The Terrans did not equip their vessels with a single life support system. They built 4. I read the procurement manifests, which detailed how each of the 4 systems was designed by a completely different manufacturing guild, utilizing different materials and separate power grids, ensuring that a single catastrophic design flaw could never cascade and kill the ship. They literally planned for their own technology to fail them. They built backup systems to monitor the backup systems of their secondary backups. The paranoia was staggering. I felt a deep, resonant pity for a species so terrified of the void, while simultaneously experiencing a cold dread at what that level of survivalist fanaticism actually implied. I forced my internal resonance to stabilize. The data was just data. Then I read the casualty survival projections from their early atmospheric test flights, and the calm I had manufactured fractured entirely. My outer carapace began to destabilize. Several small shale fragments detached from my left shoulder joint. They clattered against the polished floor. Plink, plink. I was trying to calculate the sheer economic cost of such a doctrine when the central console chimed with a priority access alert. I lost the thought entirely. I noticed that one of the luminescent moss patches in the corner was slightly discolored, a pale, sickly green instead of blue, and I focused on that tiny botanical failure for far longer than was professionally appropriate. My core temperature was fluctuating. This is an objective historical record. I need to maintain clinical detachment. I am an apprentice archivist of the Stone Communion. But my hands are shaking so badly that the individual pebbles of my fingers are grinding against each other into fine dust. I started to draft a preliminary summary regarding their resource allocation. I couldn't, because to plan for failure on that scale, to look at the infinite void and decide you will simply outlast it through sheer mathematical stubbornness. They expected the universe to try and kill them, so they built their armada as an act of pure, spiteful defiance. The holographic projection shifted from internal ship schematics to the broader fleet deployment records. I watched the numerical values cascade down the primary display in endless glowing waterfalls of data. Hundreds of vessels, thousands, all built with that same deranged overlapping redundancy. In all my cycles studying the grand galactic histories, I had never seen a civilization pour such catastrophic resources into pure survival. It was not an armada designed to conquer territory. It was an Armada designed to be entirely indestructible. The harmonic dissonance in my chest cavity grew deafening. More shale slipped from my torso, clattering against the stone floor. I did not attempt to reincorporate the lost mass. My career, my entire future ascension to Prime Archivist, depended on cataloging this threat with perfect clarity, but I was failing. I was standing in the most secure vault of the Stone Communion, surrounded by 100,000 cycles of accumulated wisdom, and I felt completely unprotected. I needed to understand the catalyst. What singular event could fracture a species' collective psyche so profoundly that they would engineer their entire civilization as a monument to absolute, unyielding stubbornness? I cross-referenced the Terran Naval Registry with our own active military encrypted logs, searching for the intersection point. The interface processed the query with a slow, grinding hum. The blue light from the primary display spiked, aggressively stark, stretching the shadows of the archive pedestals until they looked like long, grasping fingers reaching across the cold obsidian floor. The file decrypted. It was not a Terran historical document. It was a localized treaty annex, filed under the command seal of our own High Council. I opened it. The text was brutally, elegantly brief. It detailed a border skirmish from 3 Terran centuries ago, a minor territorial correction where a Stone Communion dreadnought had eradicated a nascent human colony. We had deemed them primitive. We had wiped out the settlement without attempting communication, assuming their fragile biology would simply fade into the cosmic dust. They did not fade. They remembered. They spent 300 years building 4 separate life support systems for every single ship and a sprawling, ugly fleet that now blackened the stars on our border. At the bottom of the annex, appended yesterday by the Terran Vanguard commander and transmitted directly to our fleeing Armada, was a single line of text. We asked nicely once, "Check your archives for when." My central cognitive processor seized. The silence of the archive roared in my auditory receptors. I noticed the tiny, perfectly circular scratch on the datapad screen where my stylus had slipped yesterday morning. I traced it with my thumb. I kept tracing it. I drafted the emergency evacuation and withdrawal recommendation for the High Council with one hand while desperately trying to keep my structural core from collapsing into a pile of loose gravel with the other. They were coming. All of them. 10 cycles later, the High Council ordered the complete evacuation of the sector. I never received my promotion to Prime Archivist. The walls of Chamber 42 are exactly 1 centimeter smaller than the schematics dictate. Sometimes, in the quiet dark of the refugee transports, I wonder if the stone was simply the first thing to pull back from the encroaching weight of their memory.